Hey guys, your boy Chill here. Welcome back to Pantrio. Today we're just gonna take a little bit of a tour, a little bit of an exploration into the very basics of Laravel. Baby's first Laravel. And there's a bunch of reasons for this. The main one being is that because we're gonna be creating an SPA, there's actually a lot of the very basic stuff in Laravel that you would tend to use, we're not going to be using. We're just going to basically be skipping over it completely. So I figured I just want to give you guys just a quick little tour of some of that stuff and some of the very basic stuff you would use in any Laravel app. So, you know, this series isn't going to be a tutorial. Mostly it's just going to be me showing the steps to doing what I need to do to get this project done. But sometimes we'll take a little video here and there to stop and smell the roses, and that's what this is gonna be. So here's our app. Yeah. So let's look at like where is the heart and soul of your Laravel application. So one place you might say it is here in web.php. Where does this exist? You can double click here. This is PHP Storm, I guess. Maybe many of you aren't going to be using it because it's pay to play. But you can get a month free trial if you want. Anyways, I'm not getting paid by PHP Storm, so I'm not going to plug it. Use what you want to use. So here in routes, let's take a look at this here. You know, Laravel, it has a nice organization to the project. A bunch of different folders here. Some of these folders also have other folders in them. And, you know, I'll be going over the things that we need to use as we go over them. But a very important place is here in routes. So if we go to web.php, this is where all the routes for our application is defined. You know, in a very simple web server, for example, if I go to my URL here and I type, butts, what you would expect there would be, okay, there's a root for the website, and then we'd have a folder in there called butts, and in the butts folder we have another folder called what, or maybe we have like a file called what.html or something. That's what you might expect. Or it would be a folder, butts, inside that folder is what, and inside of what is index.html. But in a modern web application, you don't have that actual structure usually in the file system. What happens is it all gets directed to the same file, and that file is index.php. And then that index.php looks at the URL and determines what code gets executed based on it. So it's dynamic routing is basically what it is. No, that's not. It's got too many freaking icons. So here we can see we have this route is defined, and we can see in here, yeah. So this is the URI, and that executes this code here in this closure. So what if we delete this? What if we just get rid of it? And then I go back here and I refresh. It's gone, not found. So here we can define all the different URIs and routes that we want to have. So if I go route, get. So you can have a get route and a post route. And mainly that's all, although there's others that you can do, but it's complicated. It doesn't freaking matter. So let's make a route, and we'll call it, butts. Because I like to call things butts. If you never heard of this about me, I like to call things butts. Now you saw in that other one, we put the code to be executed for that route directly in this call here using a closure. But normally what you do is you forward that to a controller. So in app, we have HTTP and we have controllers. We got controller.php here, and normally you would, basically inherit your controllers from controller.php, and every function in that controller would mainly correspond to a route, and you would organize things together, in a way you want. Like, let's say you have a blog, maybe you'd have one controller for posts, and then there would be a route for posting a post, for submitting one, and one for viewing a post, and one for listing all the posts or whatever. So like I said, normally you would inherit from this, but let's just put the code in the base controller here, because I don't care. just for this thing. So we make a function called public and, you know, show butts. I don't know. Yeah, we gotta say what it is. It's a function. I always forget that part. PHP. And there you have it. And then in here, you would have your logic, your processing for, you know, taking in the inputs of that route and accessing databases and stuff like that, doing processing, and then you spit out the output. And normally the way you spit out your output is you would return a view. So view is where you put all your HTML and all your templating. So let's make a view and we'll call it, you know, butts. So here is our route, or here's our controller method action. I believe it's called actions. So here we have to say, okay, so here's where the action goes. So it should be controller, and I hope this is properly namespaced, but we'll see. I think it's controller at butts. I think this is probably the syntax. So we'll find out. We'll find out. There are a variety of things that could go wrong here. We're not going to access the view because it doesn't exist yet. Let's just return some text. You can do that. You can return some text from this. And I believe if you do that, Laravel will set the appropriate headers and it'll just become text in the browser window. So yeah, we no longer have any route for the root, but if we enter butts in here, we might get an error or we might get, yeah. So target class controller does not exist. So I believe the reason for this is it's looking for a class called controller, but that doesn't exist. What exists is a class in the app namespace, in the HTTP namespace, in the controller's namespace called controller. But I believe the router here doesn't know. We haven't actually specified what namespace to look into. I kind of thought it does that by default for you, but maybe it doesn't. So let's take a look at what you have to do to handle that. We would have to go into, let me think here, I believe maybe the kernel. This has the middle, no, that's not it. So it's got to be in route service provider. You are not expected to understand this stuff just starting out. Probably won't know it. But when you get familiar with Laravel, you kind of figure out by pain where all this stuff is. So here, controller namespace for the application. This was commented out. So it is in there by default, but it's commented out for reasons. I think in previous versions it wasn't, and that's why I expected it might not be necessary, but it was necessary. So now, controller butts. Let's see if we can find the controller now. Come back to me, baby. Bad method call. No, butts does not exist. So I named it in here. I named it show butts, right? So I should put it in here, show butts. Okay, we're making progress. You know, this happens. This stuff happens. It tends to happen more when I'm recording and I have to talk while I'm thinking and coding, but it happens. There you go, butts. Okay, so normally you don't want to just return, you know, plain text. Sometimes it can be acceptable for, especially for like debugging and stuff like that. Normally you want to return view butts. So we have to create a view. And Laravel has its own templating engine that makes it much easier to do this kind of stuff, to make dynamic web pages. But the base of it is it's just HTML, and then you can add in some templating in there. So you go into resources, you go into views. We could just go new file, and the way you have to name these is, so it's butts dot, and then you have to do blade.php. That'll tell Laravel that this is a blade templating file. It should run the blade compilation on it before it is actually processed. Okay, so, and this is just HTML. So if I can't remember, what is it? HTML5? Nope, that's not it. HTML? Nope, that's not it. What about exclamation mark HTML? Nope, that's not it. What about HTML exclamation mark? Nope. Ah, there you go. Well, sort of. Sort of was that. Maybe it was just exclamation mark. Let's just do this for science. Exclamation mark. Yeah, okay. So I'll give us a little bit of boilerplate there. I know some Emmet, but I'm not a master of Emmet. So the document, the title will obviously butts. Here's the butts. Put a little dash in there. And the body. Yeah, you know. Welcome in butts. And if we do this, and if we find a thing, we refresh, welcome in butts, here's butts. Yeah, so it's executing this view. Okay, so, and that's basically the way it is. You know, Laravel is model, view, controller, first and foremost, with dynamic routing. So here's the controller. Your routing takes URIs, maps them to controller actions. Your controller is going to take in the inputs from the request, and it's going to do some processing, and it's going to forward a bunch of data. We're not forwarding any data because we don't have any data, but you would forward data to a view, and then the view would process that data with loops and stuff, and you know, turn it into HTML. And that's what gets returned to the browser. Okay, so let's make things a little more dynamic. What can you do? There's a bunch of things you can do. One thing you can do is you can take in a request object. Let me see, it's this one. And you can use this to get information about the request. So let's, the way you forward data to your view is you would have an array. And every key in this array becomes a variable in the view that you can access. So let's make, I don't know, just make some, just call it thing, I don't know. And the value is going to be request. I believe I chose the wrong request. It's not HTTP client request, by the way, obviously. I was just testing you. So illuminate HTTP. So I believe this is HTTP client is when you want to make a request from PHP to some other web server, probably. What we want is illuminate HTTP. So this is telling us the details of a request that was coming in. This is the thing we want. I mean, obviously, of course, that's what you want. All right. So now if I do input, yeah. So we could get an input. So let's just call it T. And I believe if you do it this way, not semicolon, if you do it this way, basically Laravel is going to merge all of your different kinds of inputs that you could have. You could have inputs, well, there's mainly two of them. One of them is coming in from query parameters that were put into the URL, and the other thing is from post data. If it was submitted via post. So this route is a get route. We can only have query parameters. So this is expecting there to be a query parameter T, and that will be passed on to the view. And in the view, you know, we can do here's the T, and here we can output thing. So very common in templating engines, and if you do any web development, you'll be dealing with many of them. Double brackets here, mustache. People like to call them the mustache. So this is a little escape, and here we can put in, you know, like a PHP variable, and it'll just be spit out into the body of this HTML here. So if I go into here, if I refresh it, using this when not in object content. Oh, well. Why did I type this when I meant to type thing? Sometimes my brain is just very weird brain. So yeah, here's the T. So before it got angry because there's no this, right? It's not an object. If we type in a name that doesn't exist, that we didn't pass in from here, it will also be mad. It'll say undefined variable. But if we have it defined in here, it'll be good. Now we didn't pass any input, so it's probably null, and null will just be nothing when it's output. It doesn't shit the bed if it's null, which is fairly useful. Now let's pass in something. So we said that the parameter, so the way you put a query onto the end of a URL is with a question mark. T equals badonk, because, you know, butts is badonk, and there you go. So this was passed into the router. The router or the controller got that information, passed it on to the view, and the view spit it out into here. And that is the very basic, easiest example of a dynamically generated page. But we can do many more things, and I'll show some of them off here. One little neat thing about Laravel, it has lots of different ways of doing the same thing, which can be annoying or it can be cool depending on your point of view. But one of the ways you can do is you can access inputs directly with this notation here, and uses magic method to access it as if it were a property on this object. And I believe this should work. So yeah, still works. What else can we do? So we can get in things from your query parameters, get parameters. We can also take in values or parameters, and this is very cool, inside the route itself. So if I put butts in here, and then I put braces, and I put other thing in here, what I can do is on my controller now, I can take in, let's say, a string, other thing, and now that part of the URI, the part of the path, will actually become an input into my controller that I can use to dynamically do things. So I could say now thing is other thing. And now if I refresh this, not found, right? Because the path doesn't match. It's expecting butts / something. So if I put in here, pubes, then I get, here's the T, pubes. So we can use parts of the path now as dynamic parameters into our controller. And this is very useful. Obviously, often what you'll see in here is you'll see numbers, and those numbers will correspond to an ID in the database. So if I wanted to get, butt number 134, I'd do this in my controller. I'd take that number in, then I'd use that to access the database. I'd load, butt number 134. I'd pass that onto my view, and my view would render butt number 134. So let's try that. I mean, we could try that out for here for a hot minute. So to do that, we're gonna need database. So let's get into our machine. We have our database set up, but we don't have any tables or anything in our database. Let me show you. If I go sudo mysql, let's use a command line client. Use database. What did I call it? I think I called it Pantrio, right? Database changed. So now I can do show tables. And you see there's no tables. So our database is there, but it has no tables. There's no place to store data. So we'd have to create tables. And the way you do that in Laravel is a very good way. You use migrations. So you store the table schema, the database schema, as code in your project, and then you can reproduce that and regenerate the table structure in any machine by running a command. You can also version your structure, and it's good. So under database, we have migrations, and Laravel comes with a default user table, a table for password resets. When a user resets their password, puts a thing in here, and something for jobs, which we might not even need for this project, so I'm not going to talk about it. But let's have the user table. So we want to create these tables in our database. We want to run the migration to set up the schema so that we can start inserting data into the database and accessing it from our controller. So how do we do that? Well, we could run, let's get out of here. What am I looking at for runtime on this video? Frick, it's already like 20 minutes. Man, time flies. Okay, well, let's just do this very quickly. So we want to do cd. I like to put a symlink from the root folder to the project folder, but maybe I'll do that later. var www html pantrio. And then, so in Laravel, there is PHP artisan, PHP file that exists in the root here. It's right right here. And this lets you run a bunch of commands that are very useful for development and for managing your Laravel website. And what we want to run, the command we want to run is migrate. Now, if we run this, I'm going to get a big fat error. Why? Could not find driver. Okay, so basically, in our environment file here, we have to tell it where to hook, where to look, where to connect to for the database. And I never set this up. So we're going to set it up. And we're going to set up first in the example file, and then we're going to copy that over. And I don't mind, this might be a point of contention, but for right now, I don't mind putting the password into this thing here because the database will only be accessible locally. But for something more important, and when I actually deploy it, I might change this over so that the password is not in here. But anyways, this will be useful. It's nice to have as much information as possible in the example, because when you clone the app fresh, this will not exist. You only have this is the only thing that's checked into the source control, and this will be generated from this. So the more you have in here, the less you have to do manually. So connection MySQL, that is correct. Host is the local host, that should be correct. Port, yes. Okay, now the database name is Pantrio. Why can I not type here? Pantrio. There's something wrong with my hand. Username is Pantrio, and the password is secret. Okay. Now this should be all we need to enable Laravel now to connect to our database, but I haven't actually tried connection yet, so there might be other problems with the way our username is set up or other things. But let's try it out. Run artisan migrate. Okay, so it's still having problems, and it says it cannot find driver. Let's take a look at their setup for PHP. So we don't have anything in here to do with MySQL, and that might be the problem. Although, if that is the case, this error message sucks balls, because it shouldn't say could not find driver. It should say, you know, required extension was not found. Right? So could not find driver is just annoying. But let's before, I mean, either way, I'm going to have to add MySQL into this list here. So this requires the PDO extension. And I mean, if we're going to be using MySQL, it's probably going to require MySQL extension. There's a bunch of them. And I found like there's MySQL ND and MySQL I, and I'm not exactly sure which one. At work for the last, like, you know, half a year now, I've been using different, not MySQL, I've been using, what's it called, Postgres, I don't know what people call it. But anyways, that's what we've been using. So I can't look at my current configurations and just steal them for this project. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to add in here. This looks like as good a place as any. PHP 8.0 MySQL, PHP 8.0 PDO. Perhaps this will be sufficient. Now here's the real question. Can I just run provision and it will add those things in nicely for me, or is it going to screw stuff up? We exit, we run vagrant provision. And let's see if Ansible will earn its keep here, and we'll just automatically update my my configurations here. So it appears to have worked. No errors. Install PHP ran without a hitch. Let's give her. Let's make sure everything is not broken. Okay, so at least it didn't break what we had originally. Now let's see if we can actually access the database. So, vagrant SSH, get back into our machine. All right, get back into our project root here, and we will go PHP artisan migrate. And it worked. Okay, so apparently Ansible is pretty cool. So it's migrated. Now we should see those tables in our database. So if I quickly go sudo mysql use pantrio and show tables, you can see now we've got 4 tables. So 3 tables that were specified in our migrations, and then there's 1 table that Laravel adds to store information about the different migrations so that you can roll back. You've got like an undo system, a versioning system built into the database, and it's very cool. We can do, you know, show columns, is it from, in, from, users? Yeah. So here we can see all the different columns in that table, and they correspond to what was in that migration I showed you in the create users table. All these. Nice. So it's a little small, SMOL. Yeah, there you go. So we now got our database up and running. What can we do with it? Well, I mean, let's just use what is already existing there. I don't want to create a new migration in this video. It's already getting kind of long. That's what she said. Oh. So, I want some data into my database, and there's a neat little thing you can do here. So, if we go to, where is freaking database? There it is. No. Seeders. So, you can specify some code that will seed information into the database for development purposes, or just for, you know, master data that has to be seeded in for the thing to run. So we can create 10 just random fake users, put them into the database, run it with a command proceeding. So what I can do is, if I do PHP artisan migrate rollback, it actually uncreates all those tables. And let's migrate again, but this time tell it to use the seeder, migrate and seed, and database seeding completed successfully. So now we should have data in that table. If I sudo mysql pantrio, it should connect me directly to the database. So I can do select star from users, and yeah, so here is all the user data. It's kind of long boy, so let's make this even longer. There you go. So here's our 10 users that we, Dr. Michaela Hessel III. Why do so many of these people have, like, you know, I don't know what you call these things, but it's very strange. Anyways, so now we've got data in the database. What can we do with that? Well, what we can do is we could list all the users. So let's create a route in, where is it? Where's web? Oh, I lost my web. Web.php. So let's create a route, and we'll just call the route users. And we'll call it here list users. Okay, so and then in the controller, list users, there will be no parameters, so we'll just get rid of all this bullshit. And what we want to do is access the database. Now for every table, you generally, what you have is you will have a corresponding model. So there's something called ORM, which is object relational mapping. And what it allows you to do is basically treat your data in your tables like objects. You know, your OOP, you know me. And it'll pull the data out, it'll hydrate, it'll use the relations to create compositions, and it's very nice stuff. Let me just say it's very nice. So where are my models? Here they are. And we got one model, user. And yeah, so some things are fillable. Doesn't matter. What does matter is that we want to get, so user, all. We'll get all the users from the database, and we'll return something like an array. Laravel has its own collection type, which is like arrays on steroids. And so we'll get collection of users, and we'll just pass that on to the view. Okay, so the controller has done its work. It has accessed the database and has passed that information onto the view. The view, where is it? Butts. I mean, butts is no longer a good name for this view. But also, I don't care. But also, why not? Why not? No, forget it. We're not going to worry about it. It's butts. That's what you're called. You're called butts now. Live with it. And so let's now display the users with their email and their name. Two things I don't want to do. So we'll have a table. In the table, we will have rows. And in the rows, we will have data. Yes. Okay. Now, I believe there will be two datas in the rows, like this. And now we want to do this for every user. So we use Blade. This is where the Blade templating comes in. For each users as user. And in here, we close it, and for each. And in here, we use mustache, and we go user. We don't have any IntelliSense data. There's a trick I can use to get IntelliSense data, and I often do use it. But it doesn't matter, because I know what I want here. Name, and in here, user, email. So this will spit out a table of all the users with their names and their emails, probably. Let's try it out. So the route, users, and here you go. You've got your table, your names, and your data. And there you go. There's dynamic page generation working with your database, spitting out information, templated. Yeah. And that's a lot of what you do in Laravel. There's many more sophisticated things you do, but a large portion of what you do is this kind of stuff. And it's very simple. We could also add another route in here. So users. And we can get information for a specific user. So I don't know, show user. And then in our controller here, we would, create another one, show user. And we could say, so we want an integer user. And we're going to say user is equal to user find user. Let's find method find not found in app models user. This is fine. There's magic going on. I believe this is fine. Probably shouldn't use the same, variable name for different types, but it's fine. It's just a little example. Don't lose your butts. So this one will be called butts2. And so we're gonna pass in a user ID via the URL. We're going to find the user corresponding to that in the database, load it, pass it onto the view. The view is going to, I don't know. Here's the user. And we'll just do, user pointer to name. Yeah. The user's name. Okay. Did I? Yeah, it's fine. Okay. So maybe this will work. Maybe I'm forgetting something. So if I go users 3, here's the user's name, Adele Stam II. And there you go. User number 5 is there, so on and so forth. And there's other cool things you can do, and I'll probably show them off, as time goes by. For example, what you can do is you can actually do type hinting. I can go user, And what it'll do is when it sees this in the signature for the action, and we have a route parameter coming in that's an integer, it'll actually automatically do the find and just give me the model object for that user. And then I can just get rid of this altogether. And then if I run this, it just works. Yeah. So lots of cool little like syntactic sugar things that come into Laravel, and you can use them if you like them, and you can ignore them if they trigger you for whatever reason, but they're there. And yeah, so that's the basic idea of this stuff. Now, like I said, one of the reasons why I was doing this little video here is because we're doing an SPA. We're not going to be, you know, rendering the view, the HTML, on the PHP side. We're actually going to be rendering it on the client side with the JavaScript framework, you know, Vue. So we won't get to look, we wouldn't have gotten to look at this stuff, and I just wanted to show it off a little bit, and it'll be fine. And some of this stuff we will be using, obviously. We will be doing stuff having to do with the database, and, you know, we will be doing routes, although our routes won't be in web.php. Our routes will be probably in api.php, which is just a little bit of organization to separate your standard dynamic web page routes from your API routes that are generally handled with JSON data, a REST API. But yeah, there you have it. Just a little bit of a whirlwind tour, a little bit of baby's first Laravel, and we even got our database sort of set up. So in Pantrio, I'm going to commit add PHP extensions for MySQL. Commit that, push that, and in here, first we're going to commit this example changes, important that we'll be needing. So put database info into env, and here some test stuffs for Laravel dynamic pages here. And then I'll probably just undo this commit right afterwards. But I'll leave it in the history if you guys want to check it out, but you don't want to type it out because you're lazy. Understood. There you go. So that's it. In the next video, I believe, what are we going to do in the next video? I think in the next video, we're going to set up Nuxt. So we're going to set up Vue in our project, and we're just going to do a very simple test. There will be a few stages of setting up Vue. I'm just going to set up standard Vue with Nuxt and get it running with a small test, and then maybe in the next video I'll show you a little bit about how Vue works, and then I'll get it working with TypeScript, and yeah, and we'll see where we take it from there. But well, since all the presentation and a lot of the application stuff is going to be done in Vue, we're going to be taking some videos to work with that for sure. But until then, thanks for watching, yada, yada, yada. See you later with some more Pantrio.